Do you find writing prose more difficult than poetry?
Not really. I find that when you get an idea, the idea will lead you to whatever format you're going to make of it. And some ideas are just better suited to prose. But it just, you kind of have to be open. I think it helps to be open to either one. That way you have access to more of your ideas, and you have more ways to take them the way they want to go.
Did you try writing prose early on, or was that something that came after you've written a lot of poetry?
I think I knew that I enjoyed writing poetry, but then, as I say, I think some pieces just kind of became sort of prose-ish poems, and then another thing that happened was Peter Kroc asked me to write some articles on sculpture for the Schuylkill Valley Journal, and Connie and I began to start to do this for the Schuylkill Valley Journal. Every issue, he would come up with a different local sculptural piece, and he said, "Well, write an article about this one, about this one." There was the Pilgrim, which is on by Kelly Drive. There is the Cowboy, which is by Kelly Drive. There is the Rocky statue, which is the most famous piece in the city.
And
not because it's the best.
In the world.
There's the Thinker that's also kind of famous. And but every issue, Peter comes up with another idea for a sculpture to write about. And when I started doing this, I did a very short piece on the Lincoln statue on Sedgley Drive near the Art Museum. And it was a very dry piece. It was just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. And but Peter published it anyway, and and it was okay. And then he asked me to do it again the next time, and I started to write in a sort of, I thought this is a literary journal, and he wants me to do something about a work of art. So I thought I would write it like an art article. But Connie suggested that I put a little more personality into it, as opposed to just writing it as a straight academic piece, because people can read about what the Thinker is, what the sculpture is about, and they can read about the background of Rodin's background, and they can read about all that stuff anywhere. But if you put your own spin on it, and you put a little bit of personality into it, it makes a big difference for the article. You're getting something that's unique.
Is writing articles on a sculpture, is that comparable to a practice, a ekphrastic poetry?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it is kind of like that. But you also go more into depth. Like I do research on the sculptor, and the background of this, what the subject of the sculpture is. And a lot of times it's it's a military figure, or somebody, a hero, or a notable statesman or somebody, and you want to put a certain amount of factual information in there, but you also want to give it a little personality and give it a little bit of what your experience is. I call them our sculptural adventures. Connie and I will go to the place where the sculpture is, and I'll talk about how it is to get to it in the first place. There are a lot of sculptures in Philadelphia that, in places like on the Kelly Drive, when they were placed there 100 years ago, it was a horse path, and people would be able to stop and see and look at the sculptures. But now the cars are whizzing by at 40 miles an hour, and it's hard to it's hard to even get to them. So sometimes we had to take our lives in our hands to go to wend our way around the traffic and get there. But it's been a lot of fun.
Now, you also did some volunteer work at the Woodmere.
We were docents, yeah. So we learned a lot about art doing that. There's a lot of connection between art and poetry. It's a lot of the same process goes into it as far as composition, as far as the creativity, the thought process, the deciding on what your subject is going to be and how you're going to approach it. And the thing that I'm thankful for being a writer instead of a visual artist is that there's not much overhead with writing. You don't need to invest a lot of time and material into it. If you find a piece is not working, you just start another piece. If as far as trying to paint something or sculpt something, you're pretty much invested in that piece. And especially with sculpture, I mean, you know, a false move and you ruin it. In poetry, we make a lot of false moves, and we can redo them. We get to revise. I mean, that's a wonderful, wonderful bit of freedom.
So you've been doing the articles for the Schuylkill Valley for quite a while now.
And it surprises me how Peter Kraft always manages to come up with an interesting subject for us.
Yeah, it's a good journal. It's a good journal, and you've been published in various journals. The Mad Poets Review certainly.
The Mad Poets was one of the early ones. The Schuylkill Valley Journal was one of the early ones. Jim Marinell was the editor at the time, and he liked my poems. And Eileen D'Angelo seemed to like my poems. She put some in the Mad Poets Review, and I'm very thankful to these people giving me the opportunity and the encouragement to write.
So I'll give you an opportunity to do anything that you'd like to do.
Yeah, okay. This is harder to do than this open-ended stuff is harder to do than when we do our dueling poets things, because you and I have done a lot of programs together, and you will put out certain poems out there, and all I have to do is come up with something that relates to your poem.
But all I have to do is put the poems out there, and you segue.
Oh.
You have the much harder job.
No, I think it's more fun. But that's always been fun doing that with you. I have a bit of a visual one that I'd like to try anyway. I haven't done this in public, so. I fell asleep with my arm draped across my forehead, and I dreamt that I was sleeping with my arm draped across my forehead. But in my dream, my arm weighed 500 pounds. Now in dreams, all weights and measures are approximate. But in my dream, my arm felt like it weighed 500 pounds. And I couldn't move it. Not being able to move a limb is always bad. But in a dream, it's an absolute nightmare. And the nightmare went on and on and on for what felt like 500 years. When I finally woke up, I found my arm still draped across my forehead. And though I was awake, my arm still felt like it weighed 500 pounds. Oh no, I thought, this is an absolute nightmare. Then I realized that though I was awake, my 500-pound arm was still asleep, turns out arms can have nightmares too.
Ooh. Is that brand new, Mike?
It's relatively new. Not not so new that I haven't memorized it.
I've never heard it.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Oh, good.
I,
We'll see how
I know
about
most of your,
Yeah.
your poems. Now you've done, is it 2 or 3 chapbooks? This was the latest one,
Yeah.
Between the Eyes,
Well,
and the poetry Alive and Aloud.
yeah, for reading out loud, which you helped me with this immensely, because you helped me put it together and get it formatted and get it. These were the days before you could do these.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and all the chapbooks were like stapled together type chapbooks.
Yeah, even to some of the early Mad Poet
Yes,
reviews,
yeah.
the quality is just, it's incredible.
You can see the early Mad Poets review, and it's this stapled together kind, and likewise with the Schuylkill Valley Journal. And the more recent ones, Mad Poets Review, it's they call this Perfect Bound, and this is the Schuylkill Valley Journal Perfect Bound, and that's just the technology that has facilitated all this.